Hi, my name is Nan Cohen. I'm with Light Productions and Light Television, and I want to welcome you to another Saturday Night Live with Rabbi Gershon Winkler, who comes to us from New Mexico. He's Missoula's traveling rabbi, Missoula's visiting rabbi. Passover begins this week, and so Rabbi has entitled tonight's talk, Passover and the Exodus, an exploration of soul retrieval in Jewish tradition. And he writes, the Kabbalah perceives the Exodus and subsequent 40-year desert journey of the ancient Hebrews as more than a story of a people's liberation from slavery and return to their ancestral homeland. It is also a lesson in what contemporary mystics refer to as soul retrieval, reaching back into the heart of trauma to recover fragments of one's selfhood that had become entrapped there. It is a story of healing and restoration of personal and national identity. A story every one of us can relate to, either due to personal experience or in our attempt to understand the struggle of others. Here's Gershon.
Okay, so I begin with a little chanter. This is our tradition. We begin all teachings and wisdom with a little chanter. Just like Rabbi Nachman of Breslov taught 300 years ago, actually 200 years ago, right? He taught, he said, L'kol chachma yesh bo nigun meyuchad. Every body of wisdom has its own unique melody, its own unique chant. And so in our tradition, in the old way, our people always would chant before them teaching. Sometimes they'd even chant during a teaching when they ran out of things to say. You can always sing, right?
Oye, oye,
So, we got a little holiday coming up, sneaking up behind us. It's called, what's the holiday?
Pesach.
Thank you, Pesach. Holiday of Pesach, which is a very funny word. In English we say Passover. It's a very strange word because in Hebrew it has two meanings that are contradictory to each other, like everything else in Judaism. That's why we survive for thousands of years, because we learn to walk this earth, this world. This world is full of paradox and contradiction. And in order to really walk this world smoothly, you got to walk paradoxical and contradictory. You have to be aware of the opposite poles with which we are constantly confronted in life. Good, bad, up, down, cold, hot, telemarketers, all kinds of situations in the world that come at us from all sides, that pull at us and push at us, that make us smile and make us sad, make us wake up in the morning with clarity and go to sleep in confusion, that give us vision, that blind us, that move us, and that stunt us. Welcome to this world. Now, so this word Pesach, if you change the vowels on it, it reads Piseach, which means lame, like physically challenged in your legs, like limping. Piseach means one who limps because of an injured leg. It's called Piseach. And Pesach, if you don't change the vowels and leave it at Pesach, it means springing, jumping, leaping, boing. I don't get it. How can there be such a word? Well, there are many words like this in many traditions where you have one same word that means the opposite. So in the Hebrew tradition, all you have to do is change the vowels to protect the innocent. Or you change the vowels and you give it a whole different meaning. Totally different. Piseach means limp. Pesach means spring, to jump, not the season of spring. To jump, to leap. Boing, boing. How do I understand this? What is this holiday about? Is it about limping or is it about jumping? I don't know. You know, it's funny when you see somebody jump, it looks like they limp. When you see somebody limping, it looks like they're about to jump. Because in order to go up, you've got to go down. So the jumper is limping and the limper is jumping and hopping. We learned this from the TV show Gunsmoke. Mr. Dillon. For those of you who weren't alive back then, it's okay. One day they'll show reruns. But for us old Hopalong Cassidy folk, limping is you jump when you limp. The more you limp, the more you're jumping, springing. And this is very much a thread, a strata of thread that runs through our people's story. That every time we are about to move upward, we first have to go down. Every time we're about to make a great quantum leap into a new paradigm, we first have to go limp. So our people are about to make a great leap into a new paradigm. They're ready for it. 12 tribes are developing. And what happens? Vayered Mitzrayim, and they went down into the narrow, constricted place, not conducive to jumping and to freedoming. Our ancestors called the land of Egypt the narrow place, not because it held us constricted in slavery. It didn't always. It had the best restaurants back in Abe's time, and Abraham's time, and Isaac's time. Whenever there was a famine in our land, we went down to Egypt to eat. They always had food there, even today. Why our ancestors called it the narrow place, which is what the Hebrew word for Egypt, Mitzrayim, from the word Mitzarim, which means from the place of tsar, not tsar like tsaris, but tsar like resh, which means very, very, very narrow, because they called places by how they experienced it. And Egypt, even today, is a very narrow country. Look on a map. I know it's a big box in North Africa, but if you go to where the peoplings are living, the human habitation is a narrow strip along the Nile. That's where everybody lives. Very few people live out there in the Sahara. Everybody's living right there along this very narrow strip called the Nile River. That's where everything is happening. That's where the action is. That's where the best restaurants are. And so our ancestors called it the land of the narrows. And so we go into the land of the narrows. It says, Vayered, we went down into Egypt. We went down. When Jacob, our ancestor Jacob, is going to Egypt to see Joseph, who he has been told is alive. You saw the movie, right? So it says, Vayered Yaakov Mitzrayim. Jacob went down into Egypt. Everything is going down, down, down. First there's a buildup. Begins with Abraham for our people's tradition. And begin Abraham, and great Abraham is becoming great, and he's becoming a father of many nations. And then there's Isaac, and then there's Jacob and Esau, and they become fathers of many tribes, and all the mothers of the many tribes, and everybody's growing and flourishing, and people have made peace between each other. Jacob and his brother Esau have made peace, and everything is good, and everything is great, and everything is wonderful. And all of a sudden it's on down to Egypt. Just when we're getting to juicy part of our story. Everything's going so good. Our father Jacob has had so many years of running from his brother Esau, running away from the conflict he had with his brother, the trauma that he experienced in having to leave his soul behind him because he left the only thing he was ever familiar with, the only thing he ever loved, which was sitting at home all day watching TV. And that's what it says in the Torah. Yaakov ish tom. Jacob was a perfect man. Yoshev ohalim. Sitting in tents. So the ancient rabbis say, what does that mean? It means he sat in tents. That's exactly what it means. All fricking day long, he sat in tents. He loved tents. Why, he'd see a tent a mile away, and he'd run over there before it started to rain. You have plenty of time to get there because it don't rain much over there in that land. Loved tents. Deeper meaning behind what that means, well, he loved sitting in the tents at the feet of the great masters of the era, the great teachers, like Eber. Eber was a great teacher of mystery wisdom from whom Jacob had studied and learned much of the mystery wisdom that was then prevalent in the areas around them. There was no religion as we know it today. It was just people doing things. And they just didn't have a name for it. They were racking their brains out in a tent to find names. They were just people who were living in the desert, receiving visions. They were not Jewish, they were not Zoroastrian. They were just plain old human beings. And desert dwellers, prophets, visionaries, and among them was a man named Eber, who was the son of Melchizedek, who the rabbis say was Shem, the son of Noah. So Eber taught Jacob, and Jacob would sit in the tents of great masters like Eber and like Yekutiel and other great masters of that period. Now, so he had to get out of there because that's no way for a human being to live, sitting and studying all day and meditating and becoming holy. That you can do before you get here. You can do that up there in the world of spirits and angels where they sing Bach, and Beethoven all day. Anglo angels are floating around with halos. But when you come down to this world, you got to get down into the nitty-gritty of the push and pull and the opposite polarizations of this life that create out of us a tree from the little seed of potential that we are when we come into this world. We got to be watered, we got to have manure, we got to smell good, we got to smell bad, we got to go through things. And everything we go through and struggle with and wrestle with draws forth from us our deepest, deepest, deepest mystery, our deepest selves. If you think about it, the things that make you so great, because all of you here are great, not like those people who didn't come tonight. What makes it so great is the moment you at some point made a choice, a decision, and nobody in the world could figure out why you did a thing like that. Shame on you. At some point you made a decision. You took a stand in your life that brought you to where you are in this moment, for better or for worse. But you took a stand, for better or for worse, but you made a choice. And in that moment, when we make crucial choices in our life that totally turns us around 180 degrees, in that moment we leave the tent. And we wander in the desert. We wander across the great Midbar, the great desert, the great wilderness, wondering sometimes if what we'd done was the right thing, celebrating that we did it, maybe regretting that we did it. Maybe we should have done it differently. Oh, I wish I would have been where I am now when I was there, because then I had a more clear mind to figure things out. But look, here I am already. Many often times we get very stuck in the past, and then the future gets into a standstill because we're not moving, we're stuck. In our tradition, in the Jewish mystical tradition, the Kabbalah as they call it, this is called Shuva Adonai Limnuchaychi, as the psalmist wrote, David wrote. O Infinite One, restore my soul, Shuvi Nafshi Limnuchaychi, restore my nefesh, my soul, to its place of when it was in menucha. Menucha literally translates as respite, like sitting in a tent, basking at the feet of the great masters, watching a good movie, being in the place in the world where you first began before you began. And then suddenly things took a turn for you. Something came at your life. Something compelled you to take a different turn, like it happened to Yaakov, to Jacob, who now had to wander through the desert to go away from conflict with his brother that had been created for him. And suddenly he is totally lost. Because when we go through an experience of trauma, which is not always about a car accident, it's not always about being in war or being attacked and assaulted. Trauma is when the pattern in which you are led into from the time you are born and are moving steadily in is suddenly disrupted, either by external circumstances or circumstances within yourself that compel you to make choices that suddenly shift the track you're on. Either we make choices, or sometimes choices will come at us. Jacob did not make a choice. Adam and Eve did not make a choice. They, in both stories, both parallel stories, were perfectly content to stay exactly where they were. And so, in the story of Adam and Eve, God had to send the serpent to get them out of there, to trick them and get them into trouble so they can get kicked out, to create a legal situation that would legally authorize their eviction. And in Jacob's case, the same thing had to happen. His mother, Rivka, had to create a scenario. Come on in, make yourself at home. Don't worry about it.
I'm close to them.
Oh, that's all right.
Close to the door.
That's okay. We have lots of doors here. The door, there, the door, there, the door, there, the door, there, the door, there. There's even a band called the Doors. So Jacob didn't make any decision either. Rebecca had to replay, re-dramatize the events of the Garden of Eden. Rebecca had to do the same thing God did, get them in trouble. So she got Jacob in trouble with his brother Esau, so that Jacob had to flee the wrath of his brother, who said, when Pa dies, I'm gonna kill you. So he had to flee, and he fled, and he flew. And he left the conflict behind, which means he left the trauma behind. The trauma of what? The trauma of having to abruptly shift his pattern 180 degrees. He was a man who sat still at the feet of the masters. He was a man who sat and meditated, and suddenly he's out in the wilderness, wandering, journeying, moving. No longer static. Now he was thrown cold turkey into an experience of dynamism. He has to be on the move. And where does his mother send him? She doesn't send him to the nice relatives up up north, in the northeast, back in Ur. She sends him to her brother in Haran, greatest swindler, because she wants Yaakov to be brought out. And there's no way you can be brought out if you live in perfect truth all the time. You've got to have a little bit of the opposite of everything coming at you in order to bring out the best of you. I mean, when you look at all the different traditions, whether it's Judaism or Buddhism or Islam mysticism or Christianity, everybody has the same story. I mean, the older the story, Buddhism has a story, we have the story. Everybody has a story of being tempted. The great masters have to go through, from a place of truth and purity, they have to go into the realm of being tempted. The only story this does not happen is in Judaism. We have the story of Moses being up there for 40 days and 40 nights several times, but he's not tempted. There's no temptation. You know why? I once asked my teacher why that is back in Jerusalem. He said, "There's plenty of temptation everywhere. You don't need to go on a mountain for that." Every day Moshe had temptation wherever he was. In his tent, outside his tent, among the people, outside the people, as a shepherd, as a prince. He had a plenty. Every one of us goes through our little times of that. But what it has to do with endeavoring, trying to recover the place that got lost, the place in me that got lost. The trauma of the shift, whether your choice comes within because you feel this is the right choice for you, or whether your choice came from without, you were just thrown out into the desert. Doesn't matter who makes the choice and where it comes from. The fact is that when we have to make choices that totally turn us around 180 degrees from our pattern, we do what we can. We yearn, we walk around with a desire, deep desire to retrieve that got lost in the whirlwind of the trauma of our transformation. And we do it in different ways. Make wrong decisions. Get into relationships that are not good for us, whatever it might be. Rob a bank. So what happens? What does that mean? What the Kabbalah talks about, leaving a part of your soul self in a place of trauma. What does that mean? What did King David mean in the Psalms? Shuvi nafshi, return, O my soul, limenuchaychi, to your respite, to the place of your rest. It means come back to that place where you stood at the crossroads before you were catapulted outside of your patterns. This is what Moses experiences at the burning bush. Moshe is a shepherd. Moshe haya roeh tzon yitro. The book of Exodus tells us. And Moses was a shepherd who shepherded the sheep of Jethro. So first the ancient rabbis asked, what do you mean, he didn't have his own sheep? Jethro is a very wealthy man. Couldn't he give Moses some of his own sheep to go shepherd? Why is the Torah, and who cares anyway whose sheep he was shepherding? Why doesn't it just say Moses was a shepherd? Very good. We don't even need to know that. He was taking a walk one day. We don't even need to know that. What do we care what his occupation was? And so the ancient rabbis say, we do care because the way it is worded, it tells us something about why he was chosen to lead the people. And he was such a good shepherd. Because what led him to the burning bush, our tradition teaches, was one of the little lambs getting lost. And he's chasing after it. And when, so, if it's somebody else's sheep, who cares? If it's your sheep, your money, take good care of it. And so the Torah is telling us Moses didn't care whose sheep it was, because he realized that nobody owns nothing. That no matter what it is, if it's a living thing, a living being, you take care of it. You shepherd it. You don't ask it what kind of religion it is, or or where it came from, or does it have a card? You take care of it. Now he comes to this place. The Zohar tells us what led him to the burning bush. Birds. Birds led him there. He saw birds that were flying swiftly and eagerly to an area and then would stop and come back. And they would fly again toward the area, but not actually go into the area, and then come back. So he realized there's a vortex, there's something there, something very special and sacred going on over there, that the birds are being drawn to it, but they can't quite get there, which is the theme of our entire Torah, almost getting there. Like I mentioned to some of you yesterday and today, we begin the Torah we read a portion of the Torah every weekend. We read a portion of the Torah. We begin with Genesis, move all the way to Moses and the people standing on the eastern shore of the Jordan, ready to cross over to that promised land toward which they had been journeying for so many years and suffering and struggling and learning laws about how to live there, going back to their ancestral homeland. And then they get there and they're about to cross the Jordan. Next weekend, we can't wait to see what happens. Next weekend, in the beginning when God created the heavens and the earth. When will we ever get there? We almost get across the Jordan, but we never quite do. Of course, you can read the book of Joshua and all the other books that tell us the history of what happened afterwards. But the Torah, which is our path guide, the 5 books of Moses, bless you, which is our path guide, that's what the Torah means. Torah literally translates as that which will show you. Lehorot, to show, to guide, to point. It's like the word for parent is horeh, or horah, and teacher is morah, or moreh, depending on woman or man. So you see that all Torah, all those words, Torah, morah, horah, have to do with guiding, showing, pointing, directing. It doesn't mean the law, like they translate it, and the law. The law, what law? Eliezer talking to Rebekah is a law. Rachel kissing Jacob is a law. Noah rolling around after a couple of beers in the mud is a law. What the hell are they talking about? It means a guide. We learn from the stories. The stories guide us. So our Torah, which is our guide, teaches us by virtue of how it is read and how it ends that it's not about getting there. It's about going there. Because so what? So you get there. Now what? So what? Welcome home. Great. It's all milk and honey after that, right? The rest of the Tanakh is about one war after another, one conflict after another to this very day. Great, 1948, we came back to our homeland, although there were Jews living there all the time, but now we became a Jewish state. Wonderful. Great. Now what? Good morning. Welcome home. It's not about that. It's about getting there. 2,000 years of hoping is more powerful than getting there and going there. 2,000 years of really being there, not geographically necessarily, but being there in consciousness is more sacred and more important. Because once you get there, you can turn it into something that it never existed as in your consciousness before. All the yearning and the prayers and the hope and the liturgy and the songs about going back to Jerusalem, they're gone. Because we're there. Have we learned how to live in that land? I don't know. I'll leave that to you to figure out. Tov mareh na'im ma'aseh atzmo, the ancient rabbi said, more powerful is the view from afar than actually getting there. I mean, you could stand in Moab, Utah, right? And look at that incredible scenery. And then you just want to go in there and hug those mountains. And when you get there, there's nothing but a big wall. The awesomeness of being there is gone when you go too close. If you climb down the Grand Canyon into the Colorado, the awe that you felt standing there looking at the majestic panoramic view of the Grand Canyon is gone. Goodbye. You can't go inside to find it. That's what God told Moses later, and Moses says, Hareini na kavodecha, show me your glory. And God said, Lo jirani ha'adam v'chai, baby. Which means, ain't nobody can see me and live at the same time. Choose one or the other. From where you are, this is my glory. If you want to see more, you can't be here, because this is a finite place. And so, getting back to Moses, he's standing at the burning bush, and God does not talk to him, does not reveal itself to him. It says an angel of God came. And an angel of the Infinite One appeared to Moses in the flame of a fire, in a flaming fire of the bush. And still does not speak to him, and it does not even come to him until one important action on behalf of Moses occurs. And that is, he steps off the path. The very words before the revelation to Moses, that vision of the angel of Adonai in the fire, it says, Vaya ki saw min haderech, and God saw that he strayed off the path. Now I can talk to you. I'm bored with everybody who's perfect and stays on the path all the time. That's boring to me. I didn't need to create a world for that. Shoo! But if you step off the path, if you dare to shake yourself loose from your patterns, that's when the connection happens. You see that in Genesis in the story of Cain and Abel. Two brothers. Cain offers the first sacrifice in human history, or recorded human history in our tradition. He made it up. He patents it. It's copyright, patented. 5,764 BCE. Cain Greenberg. No? There it is. I offer a sacrifice. I made it up. His brother Abel in English, sees and says, wow, what a good idea. I'll do it even better. And he brings from the best of his flock, it says. Not just any schlocky-looking cabbage. He brings the best of his flock. He was a shepherd. He was an animal husbandry man. And so, the best of his flock. He did it better. He added quality to it. He put Intel inside. And AOL and everything. It came fully loaded with a disk and everything. Disk drive. So God is drawn to the one who comes with more intention and consciousness, but God does not reveal itself to Abel. It says, and God was drawn to Abel and his sacrifice. Very nice, very sweet. But there's no dialogue that goes on. No revelatory experience happens to Abel, who did it so good that God accepted his offering. Where does the revelatory experience happen? It happens to Cain, who now is sitting there seething and scheming and feeling jealous and feeling upset at his brother. And God speaks to him and says, Brother Cain, there are two doors in front of you. The lady behind the one, the tiger behind the other. Which one are you going to choose? Which road are you going to take? You're going to fall into your emotions? Your countenance has fallen. I don't recognize you. You look very different from someone who is into life. You look like someone who is dying inside and wants everything around him to die. It's your choice. Conflict is now before you, and your choice is to succumb to the conflict and allow the conflict to take you over and move you to wherever its wind might blow, And the other choice is to overcome the conflict, to move through the darkness until the light emerges again. Of course, Cain succumbs, and his brother is killed. First case of third-degree manslaughter. You can't say it was premeditated murder because, after all, nobody died yet. So who knew from death and who knew from killing? And who knew how to do it? And who knew that you could do it? So I would say it would be third-degree manslaughter. And so he gets away with it. He's sentenced to wander and to be in solitude, which later gets cut in half. He ends up building a big city, after all. Gadol avoni means so, he says, because the wrongness of what I did is too great for me to bear. Something Adam and Eve didn't say. So he owned up his action, and so he had his sentence cut in half for good behavior and on probation for 135 years, and it was all right. So God is drawn, stories tell us, to you and me when we're standing at the crossroads of, I don't know what the right thing is. Because that's fun. That's not boring. The great God sleeps for thousands of years at a time, waiting for somebody to stand at the crossroads. Which way should I go? What's that? I hear somebody. Which way should I go? What should I do? Oh, yes. Where is he? Give me that. Let's see. There he is. Son of a gun. He's at the crossroads, finally, after all these centuries. About time, crossroads. Look at him sweat. Hey, take a look. Crossroads. And God saw that Moses stepped off the path. Now God says to Moses like this, Shal na'alecha me'al raglecha, which is translated as remove your Nikes from off your feet. But you know, the same Hebrew words can be translated just as easily and grammatically correct as follows. Shal, remove, na'alecha, that which locks you up. The word na'al means to shut up something, to lock up something. It doesn't just mean shoe. Same word could also mean to close up, to lock up something. Me'al raglecha, from your regularity, your patterns. Because regel means feet. Regel also can mean, like from the word ragil, which means habitual. Undo the lock from your habitual self. You're already taken the one step of stepping off the path. Now can you take the second step, which is to remove that which locks you in your pattern? Can you move into dynamism like you once did in Egypt when you saw your fellow Hebrew being beaten by a slave master? Can you go back to being that dynamic person again? Because the earth, the place where you're standing right now in this moment, is holy, is sacred. That situation, that circumstance where I am right now, when I stand at the crossroads of having to make a choice, should I just stay put? Should I take a chance? That's the holy place. Very holy place. Very great place. Now Moses has a very great problem. He lost his soul, so to speak. A spark of his essence still lives in exile. His spark of his soul began in exile and dies in exile. Because he was born among the Hebrews. He's raised by the daughter of the Pharaoh, exiled from his family. Once again, he is exiled from the land, from his foster family that raises him in the house of Pharaoh. After he slays the Egyptian taskmaster, he now has to flee as a fugitive from Egypt. He has to go into exile again. And he ends up in Midian, where he gets married, has kids, and has a nice job as a shepherd. And there he just sits in a tent, so to speak. There he just surrenders to the situation and lives his life, and there's no real presence until he takes that step off the path, and God says, Moshe, Moshe, and Moshe says, Hineni, I am here. Without saying that, nothing happens. And then he's told to take a people out of their trauma. He has barely even gone to take care of his own. He's told to go back to the very same place where he lost a part of his self. When I lose a part of myself, I lose a chunk of my aliveness. I can be more alive in myself if I can retrieve that piece of me that I left behind or that got left behind in the trauma of my life. Because when I was shaken out of my patterns, or made the choice to step out of my pattern, it shifted so radically that there is a piece of me that still dwells there and waits for me to come back and take it with me. Now, Rabbi Menashe ben Yisrael, who lived in the 16th century, or when did Rembrandt live? Anybody know? 1600s? Yeah. Yeah? Oh, all right. 1500s? Okay. Do we hear 16? Going once, twice. So Rabbi Menashe ben Israel was painted by Rembrandt. He was like the only Jew ever painted by Rembrandt. He was a great rabbi who was among the exiles from Spain. He settled in Amsterdam, became the rabbi there, and was a great Kabbalist. So Rabbi Menashe ben Israel, when he speaks about the soul being left behind, or part of the soul being left behind, says, why does that happen? Why, when we make a radical change or experience trauma in life, do we not just go with all of who we are? What does that mean that the ancients taught about a spark of our soul, stays behind? So he said it means because there's a part of us that even when we have to leave is not so sure. No matter how horrifying and tragic is the trauma, there's a part of our soul that does not feel a total clarity of leaving because it didn't feel like it was the right time, or it didn't feel like it was not sure it was the right choice, or it didn't feel that that it should have happened to begin with, that now it has to leave. Somebody comes and ruins my life. So I'm getting out of this situation, and I will heal from it, but there's a part of me that says, nobody had a right to come in and interrupt my life. I'm staying right here. This is my land. And so the majority of who we are moves on to get away from the situation and to heal from it. And meanwhile, there's a piece of us that stays there waiting for us to come and get it. Waiting for us to go back there and to retrieve it. And that's why Moses is the perfect candidate for doing the healing for the Israelites. Because he is a man who is born in exile, raised in exile, wanders in exile, and now is told to do exactly what he is going to do for the people. He's now told to go back to the very place where he left a good chunk of his self behind. He left Egypt. He had a trauma in Egypt. The trauma of being separated from his mother, his family, his people. The trauma of then being raised as a foster child and daughter of Pharaoh in the house of Pharaoh, and then having to leave again everything that was familiar to him. The trauma of leaving a position of power as a prince in Egypt to now wander like a vagabond, bound, wound in the desert, in a like a nomad with no money, not a job, nothing. Not knowing where he's going to go. And so now the Creator says to him, okay, it's time to heal. You have to go back to Egypt. And look at the wording. It says, the people who have schemed against you are gone. You can now go back. So Rabbi Menashe ben Yisrael says, what does that mean? It means that part of the event that drove you out, that severed you from a piece of yourself that was left behind, is gone. The situation is changed now. You can go back. It's time to go back. It's not always the healthiest thing to go back right away. Sometimes you have to get far enough away and create enough muscle in your soul and in your spirit and create enough direction in your life for you to have the power to go back and to retrieve that piece of you from that nightmarish moment, from that moment of trauma. And so God says that situation that has kept you all these years from going back is gone. You can go back now. And Moshe fights it because it's a difficult thing to go. I don't ever want to go back there. I don't ever want to go back to the place that I left, that traumatized me, that shook me so violently that my life took on all kinds of scary shapes before I got some clarity. I don't ever want to go back there. It's an alien place to me. It's a strange place to me. I don't want to go back. So you have 10 chapters of Moses arguing with God. I don't want to go. Go. I don't want to go. I don't know how to speak to the Pharaoh. I'll teach you. The people won't believe me. I'll teach you tricks. They'll ask me what your name is. Tell them I am who I am. None of their business. Right? Yeah, it goes on and on and on and on and on and on. Shlach no b'yat tishlach. Send somebody else, please. You know? He doesn't want to go back. He doesn't want to go back. He's right to go back because he had enough presence to step off the path and to unlock the patterns. But going back, that's too much to ask. I'm ready for anything else. Hineni, I'm here for whatever you want, God. You know, you want me to do the dishes? Whatever, you know, vacuum the desert, pick up the rocks, you know, anything you want, man. I'm ready. I'm totally ready, man. I am here. I am here. But you want me to go back to that place? I can't. I can't. And so finally he ends up going anyway, because God gives into the argument and promises that he would give him some help. He'll send Aaron, his brother, to meet him when he gets there, and Aaron will be his spokesperson. Aaron will help him. So, but with all the details aside, this is a story of a man who left a chunk of himself, who's walking around with a big piece of himself missing, which means a big piece of his aliveness is missing. The story of Moses is empty. It's totally empty until he comes back to Egypt. Then it's alive. Until that point, there's a little baby. He gets picked up by the daughter of the Pharaoh, nurses at the breast of his mother. He's weaned and grows up in the palace of the Pharaoh after he is weaned. And there's nothing told about him, his escapades, nothing. And then he goes out, he sees a Hebrew being beaten, he knows he belongs to these people, he can't stand it. He vayach et hamitzri, and he smote the Egyptian. Those days they didn't kill, they smote. And then the Pharaoh says, he must be the one we missed when we threw all the babies in the river, because the astrologer said that the Redeemer of the people will be born. That's an old legend, goes way back. So he has to flee. We don't hear anything for years about this man. He finally comes to this well. He chases away some shepherds who are harassing the daughters of Jethro. They take him home. There's nothing about him. Nothing about him. All the other stories about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, there's dialogue, there's embellishment, there's character development. You get to really feel these people, Sarah, Hagar, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah, they're alive. Moses is this shell moving through the desert, ending up as a shepherd. But then suddenly he comes back to Egypt, and suddenly he takes on form, he takes on color. Why? Because he has retrieved his persona, that part of him that he left behind when he had to leave Egypt. He goes back into the house of the Pharaoh. He stands before the very people who created the exile in the beginning to begin with. He goes right back to the heart of the exile, to the eye of the storm, and he says, this is what God says, Shalach ami v'yavduni, send out my people and let them worship me. Send out my people and let them worship me. So Rabbi Yeshayahu ben Avraham, who lived in the 17th century, 1600s, said, what does that mean? It means send out, release me. Release my people. Ami, imi, atzmi. Send out all that is with me, all of the parts of me that I have left behind in the trauma of my early childhood here in Egypt. V'yavduni, and let them worship me. Let them be restored to me. Let them draw near to me. Because worship in the Hebrew vernacular, avodah, connotes a connecting, a drawing close to. We don't pray because we have to pray, otherwise God won't give us money. And we'll have, bad kidneys and stuff. We pray because we want to draw near. We want to have connection. So please send out all of me. Release me. His freeing the people, Yeshayahu ben Avraham writes, is also an act of freeing himself. Moses had to go back to Egypt not just to free the Israelites, but he went back to free himself as well. And by freeing himself, he frees the people. And the people are freed, but Moses now has learned the art of soul retrieval. How do we know that he learned that art? Because he has the people do the exact same thing. He tells the people, and this is where we get into the Seder. He tells the people that after the 10th plague, when the Pharaoh says, okay, I had enough, right? So Moses says to the people, put on your sandals on your feet, have your backpacks on your backs, have your staff, your walking staffs in your hand, and sit down and have a meal. Be prepared to go and move away from the trauma of these last few hundred years, but don't leave without yourself. Fully yourself. Meaning, first sit and be with the trauma. How do I do that? Well, first you need to ingest innocence lost, vulnerability shattered. You must eat the lamb completely. Nothing is to be left until morning. The lamb represents innocence, sweetness, vulnerability. Then you must dab blood on the doorposts, on either side of the doorpost and the crossbeam of your huts. Because when you leave, you're going to walk through with a consciousness. You're going to walk through the passageway of life and death and the one God in whose hands are both life and death. Because when you do a personal transformation, a change, a life cycle or a life change, something dies behind you. Maybe a friendship, maybe a relationship, a part of yourself that you have to let go of. And something new becomes alive and becomes born. The blood of life and the blood of death. Blood is life and blood is death. Depends the circumstances in which it is coming out. Menstrual blood is the blood of life. Good, healthy fertility. A gunshot wound blood is not. Or paper cuts, even worse. So they're told to be ready to leave, but to sit down and eat a very specific menu. The other part of the menu was bitter herbs. Face the bitterness of what you've been through. Don't get lost in the celebration of going out, because if you do, you're going to leave a whole big piece of you behind. And we see this later on in the stories that a lot of them did leave behind a part of themselves. Remember the story in the desert? The people are complaining, why did you take us out of Egypt? It was so good there. I mean, okay, so they whipped us and stuff, but the cuisine was really good. It was worth it. Why did the people resist after they were out? Because not all of them did, but some of them did. Why? Because not everybody paid attention to the ceremony. You know, we have a lot of rituals in our tradition, but if we just do them because, well, we're supposed to, nothing happens. You have to bring yourself to it. It's like Rabbi Yisrael of Rizhin, a great Hasidic master in the 1700s, he said, I can't believe it. We have 5 books of the Torah, and we have 4 books of the Code of Jewish Law. It doesn't make sense. Where's the 5th book of the Code of Jewish Law? And he said, aha, you are the 5th book. If you don't bring yourself to it, meaningless. So they sat there and they ate bitter herbs. And they had their sandals on, they had their sticks ready, they had their knapsacks. They were ready to go, ready to move on out of the trauma, but they were also being told in the moment, don't do what I did. Don't leave yourself behind and walk through the desert like shells. Take it with you. Take every part of you with you. And we see again later in the story that many of them didn't, weren't able to. And that Moses becomes a living entity, a living being. Blood flows through his body again. Passion rises in his heart. Sometimes a little bit too crazy, but he's alive. He's a living being again. He recovered himself, and in the process, recovered his people. And in the process, recovered a lot of other people. As it says in chapter 12 in Exodus, that other people went out with him who were not Jewish. Other slaves or just Egyptians who just liked the guy because he was really handsome. You know, looked like Charlton Heston. So although they didn't agree with him politically, he was a good-looking enough guy that they went after, followed him through the desert. And the people became alive. For hundreds of years they were shells. But here they were in the desert, becoming alive because they had taken with them all of who they were. Some of them. Many of them didn't. And they didn't make it to the other side. The Passover Seder is a reenactment. I mean, the community Seder is more like a carnival, but if you do a nice, quiet Passover Seder in your friend's house after I leave, you know, it's a reenactment of what in contemporary vernacular they call soul retrieval. It's about going back to the place within our lives, not just historically Egypt, but taking the opportunity of the meal to go back to the place where it began and whatever shifted your life. Even though life might be really great now, it can be even greater if we every now and then go back and fetch a little bit more of what we left behind. Eat the bitter herb, the parsley and salt water. Tooey. The matzah stuck in your gums. The gooey stuff. You know, the applesauce and walnut and wine. Just to really get into the symbolism behind the food, the egg, all of it is part of that soul restoration of the fullness of our soul. The egg symbolizes newness, new birth. And that's why we celebrate this whole meal, this whole ritual now. Not only why, because it's springtime and things are now becoming newly born out of the earth, but if you look outside tonight, you'll see that the moon is full. The fullness of life waits for you to come to it. You see, when we're sick, for example, when they talk about healing in the Kabbalah, they say there are two things to be aware of. One is the disease came to me. Okay, that's sweet. Welcome, disease. Have a seat. The second part now is, how do I now come to the disease? Or do I at all? Do I just say, well, the disease is here, goodbye. I'll go see a doctor tomorrow and it'll take me over. Maybe I'll die, maybe I'll live. I'll go get some prescription pills from Canada. Or will I say, okay, the disease has come and it's here. Now it's my turn to make my move. How will I come to it? Will I come to it as a subservient to it? Or will I come to it as a warrior and say to the disease, I'm ready to dance with you, or I'm ready to fight with you? The choice is yours. And the same thing with all that we go through in life that is sometimes very hard. Often it is so easy to fall asleep in the new life we make for ourselves and not go back to that place with the power we now have in the place that we are. I remember when I left New York City, where I lived for quite a while, in the very Orthodox community, and I decided in my life to leave, and I lived in West by God, Virginia for many years in the woods, in a cabin with no water, no nothing. The Indians called me no running water. So I felt so free, freed up from the strictures of religion and community tightness and all that. It's a great community, and I loved it, and I grew up with it, I was born into it, but it was no more time for that for me. I needed to get out there and just be totally free and crazy, and so I did. So there I was living in West Virginia. Not a single, no Orthodox Jews out there. Well, in the area where I lived, there weren't even any Jews at all. All Jews live on the other side, the western side of West Virginia. Bigger cities, Charleston, Clarksburg. I lived in the Monongahela National Forest. Why, they never even heard of Jews out there. They thought they were extinct long ago. Something they talk about in biblical studies. I felt so good and so free. I could develop, I could evolve, I could be all that I can be. It's wonderful. I can breathe. It was great. I succeeded in running away from a way of life that, for me, became a little suffocating, a little claustrophobic for me. Years go by, I'm living in West Virginia. Make a long story short, one day I'm asked by a federal prison camp 125 miles away toward the west if I would come and visit some Jewish white-collar inmates there from New York and Connecticut, sent to this nice little federal prison camp, minimum security. So I go, and I could use the money, it was good, and so I would drive 125 miles twice a month to the prison camp. I would visit, do things, Jewish stuff with them, and go back. One day, after 2 years of doing this, I get a call from the warden saying, "Rabbi, yeah, I need you bad." "I'm not that type." No, you gotta come right away." All right, so I came there. I drove 3.5 hours. I got to the prison camp. I walk inside his office, and there are 2 Hasidim sitting in his office. 2 ultra-Orthodox Jewish men are sitting in his office. No way in the world would they find me in West Virginia. Why were they here? So they had done a little money laundering. They'd gotten caught. They were being sentenced for a year at this prison camp. And they wouldn't eat the kosher food that I got for the other inmates who wanted kosher food because it wasn't kosher enough. So here I am sitting in this office with the very people I left behind years ago and had moved so far into the mountains of Appalachia and Allegheny so that I wouldn't have to be there anymore. No way are they ever going to find me out here. And there they were, Mutt and Jeff. Winkler, yeah, we know your father, don't we? It's amazing. Amazing. The warden said, "You know these people?" "No, I don't know them. It's just, in that community, everybody knows everybody's name, but I don't know these people individually." "The conflict of interest, if you do." "I know, I understand. I never met these guys before." So I have to, I do what I can to explain to the warden why the kosher food isn't kosher enough for them. He didn't understand, so I said, "Are Amish people Christian?" The warden said, "Yes." "Okay. Do you get it?" "Oh, okay. You have your Amish, we have our Hasidim." So they have different standards, just like the Amish have different standards within the Christian religion. So do the Hasidim have different standards of kashrut? They don't trust it's not kosher enough. That's all I can tell you. I gave them a long talk, and I helped them get special kosher food for them. And then they didn't want to pray Yom Kippur with us because, we're not religious enough. And so one of my visits, they asked me if I would please explain to the warden that they need to have their own kind come out from New York. With the warden, they would pay their own way, but 15 of them would fly out from Brooklyn. So not only did I have 2 following me all over West Virginia. So Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur came. I got permission from the warden to authorize people from their community to come out so they can pray together and have their own room to do it. Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. And so you have 15 Hasidim walking down a country road on Rosh Hashanah morning on their way, people almost crashing into each other with their trucks, driving by the scenery, people in long black coats and big black hats and long side curls and big prayer shawls marching through the streets of West Virginia. Now, after that incident, after your Yom Kippur, when the 2 had become 15, I went back to my little old cabin way out in a quiet place in Seneca Rocks, West Virginia. And I sat there and I realized, you really can't run away from it. You got to face it. You got to go back and you got to come to it from where you are now. Next time I went to New York to visit my parents and my teenagers, I went back and I put on my Jewish hat. It didn't look anything like this. It was all black. But this is what I wore in my heart. And I put on my prayer shawl and I went to the synagogue on Shabbat and I prayed with the people, and I felt so good from then on, like a whole new life force came into my being from that moment on. You can't run away from it. You have to go back at some point when you feel strong enough to the place where it began, where the shift began, and from there continue one's life. The people were told, don't just leave Egypt. Get into it first, then leave. Eat the bitter herb. Remember, don't let it get lost in the celebration and joy of finally getting out of this crazy situation. Don't forget the crazy situation, because if you do, it'll follow you all the way to West Virginia. And it won't just be 2, it'll be 15 of them. And I know in my heart of hearts that had I not realized this and gone back, really gone back, and then from there to move on, but gone back to make peace with the discomfort I was feeling, I probably would have had 25 of them next Rosh Hashanah. There would have been 30 or 40 of them. And the one after that, 100 of them. And after that, there would be thousands coming to my land there in Monongahela National Forest, praying and shaking all over the mountains. Every tree would have turned into a chassid. And we see this in the story of Jacob, Yaakov, who flees his brother. And reliving and retelling the story of the trauma of my own people and their story, of my ancestors and their story, I can heal also much of myself, my own story. Because I too am an ancestor. Each one of you sitting here is an ancestor. That's a great reminder to us by Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, great Hasidic master who lived in the 1700s. He's the great grandson of the Baal Shem Tov. He said, honor and respect the ancestors who came before you, for their wisdom is unbelievably great. But don't forget one important thing. You too are an ancestor. What are you going to do about it? You too bear great wisdom, great guidance for people in your life, whether you have children or not, for people in life, for students, or people who are touched by you, whose lives you can help and transform. You are an ancestor too. You are an ancestor of the future people that come after you. Take it seriously. Go back to the core of your essence. Discover the ancestor in you. On Pesach, we do that by reliving, retelling the story of our own ancestors, of their struggles, of their faith, of their doubts, of their trauma. And by doing so, if we do it consciously, to go back through the conduit all the way back to our own. I often give them the example of the standing at Victoria Falls or Niagara Falls. Great, gushing, loud, roaring, powerful, awesome waters. The Great Falls. That's my life. That's your life. The known life, the life that we're living today, the vivid life, the great waterfall, the great obviousness, the great conspicuousness of the moment. Now climb up that waterfall and follow it, and you'll find a river, a raging river. Keep walking, and it turns into a stream. Keep walking, it turns into a creek. Keep walking, and there's nothing but a little drop of water oozing out of a rock. Trickle, 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 trickle.
Each of us has the capacity, when we're ready, when we're as powerful as a waterfall, to trace our power to where it oozes as a little trickle, and to move our life forward from that place, because that's where the power is. Like God said to Zechariah the prophet, tell the people, Lo b'koach, lo b'gvura, kim beruchi, not by might and not by power, but by my Spirit, by your Spirit. I want to wish you all a fun, wild, wonderful, healing Passover holiday season. Don't get too caught up in it. Remember when I was a very Orthodox rabbi, a woman called me on the eve of Passover saying, I just took my kitchen apart. I can't put the stove together. I don't know what to do. I haven't begun cooking. I was checking for leaven. I said, who's leaven? You know, leaven like breadcrumbs and stuff. Oh, yeah, of course. I thought she was having an affair. A guy named Leaven. So I drove to her house and spent close to an hour and a half putting her stove together. That's how the laptop got invented. And I told her, you know, you don't have to go that far. Relax, take it easy. Don't enslave yourself trying to free yourself. Any questions? Any answers? Any dirty jokes? Yes?
This camera is a bottom loader. That means when we have to switch tapes, we have to do, it takes a while. And so I think we missed some important stuff for continuity from on the show from one tape to the other. You were talking about when you do Passover, when you leave the Seder, and that didn't get on the tape, and I think that's important. Would you mind either going backwards a little or forwards a little and help repeat something so
Rewind.
Understand?
I was talking at that moment about the Passover Seder. Was I talking about how the original Passover Seder, or was I talking about that's why at the Passover Seder we have an opportunity to bring ourselves to it, that when we retell the story of our ancestors and the trauma they went through and their journey from the trauma through facing the trauma, we too can in that moment, in that meal, also go take our own story and merge it with those stories to bring healing to ourselves from whatever trauma we're trying to heal from. And in general, it's just very important to know that a story of a people, whether it's Jewish or whether it's Native American or Indonesian, a people's ancient stories are very important because it is not just a story of our ancestors. Their stories are our stories. You can easily fit your story into any one of them. And when we do these rituals where we reenact a particular story, such as Passover coming out of bondage and out of slavery, although a lot of people are into bondage these days, or Shavuot, which is celebrating receiving the Torah, the guidance at Mount Sinai 3,013 years ago. In those moments, it's not just about commemorating something that happened a long time ago. It's also a reminder to the story within our own selves, our own story standing at the mountain. It's like when you had your own revelation that came to you all of a sudden that differed from the way your parents had raised you or your teachers had taught you or your religion had marinated you. At some point when you made your own decision in life that became your choice. Nobody else's voice was in your head that time. When you became a created being, You celebrate creation, Rosh Hashanah. You celebrate the temporalness of your journey on Sukkot. You celebrate the healing of your traumas and Passover. You celebrate your revelation that changed your life on Shavuot. And each one of them corresponds to the different seasons, you know. And Sukkot, we celebrate the creation during the fall, during autumn, when everything is going back into the earth. Because how do I celebrate creation? I'm a product of my environment. I'm a product of my parents. You know, my mother keeps telling me that if it wasn't for my father, I wouldn't be here. You know, so how do I feel like I'm a created being? I'm a born being, but I'm not a created being. But then comes Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Sukkot, the harvest season, when everything outside of me is moving inward into the earth. When I am moving inward into the sukkah. When everything is moving, the bear is moving into the cave for the winter. Everything is moving inward. You know, so then I go inward to before, to the very beginning of the beginning of the beginning of the beginning of my parents who came before that. And I come to the point of creation. I'm a created being. Or I go to the beginning of what has led me to my life, the way I lead my life now. That becomes my beginning. I'm a created being by virtue of having created my own life, having made a decision that was contrary or radically different from being a product of my environment. Martin Buber writes about that. He writes and says, one of his essays, he says, you can feel yourself as a created being the moment you realize where you stepped off the path of those whose voices had led you until that point. In that moment when you said, well, okay, thank you very much for all your voices, I'm going this way. In that moment, you have become a created being. You're no longer a product of your environment. You're no longer a product of your religious education or your communal inspiration. Something inside of you that's much bigger, that is the presence and the revelation of the divine that tells you, like God said to Abraham, Vayomer Adonai el Avram, and the Infinite One said to Abraham, Lech lecha, go to you. In the English they translated, of course, I mentioned many times, go get thee forth, right? But literally it means, lech means go, lecha means to you. El ha'aretz asher areka, to the land that I will show you. That sounds like another double speak, right? Go to yourself, to the land. That's like when I, if I, when I would take a hike with my kids when they were young, I would say, you lead this time. Okay? You lead this time. Go that way. Or is God saying something different? Saying, if you want to know where it is that the highest good would come, where I would really want you to go, you have to go to yourself. That's where I speak to you. Yes?
I have a question regarding the soul retrieval. I'm going back, for instance, to a situation that's not good, in which you might confront a person, let's say, that you were in an abusive relationship with. Maybe it's not always desirable to try to go back to retrieve that part of oneself. It means compromising oneself. And so is it possible to work that out in situations that come in the course of life without actually going back to that particular situation and that particular person?
Oh, absolutely. Don't ever go back to the people. People make you sick.
They asked Rabbi Nachman of Breslov in the 1700s, because he was a great healer, and so his disciples once asked him, what is the greatest cause of illness? And he said, people. Nothing makes you more sick than people. So no. So the Torah tells us like this in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 17, I believe, where it says, Lo tisnot achicha bilvavacha, don't hate your brother, your fellow in your heart. Hochiach tochiach et amitecha. Have it out. Rebuke your fellow. Ve'al tisa alav chet. But don't take the failure thereof upon yourself. Now, so the Talmud says, what does that mean? That means that not always is the other person ready to do healing with you. And not always is the other person the place to do healing with, the person to do healing with. It can make things worse because some people are, unfortunately designed that way. There's a flaw when they were manufactured, or the way they manufactured themselves through their own choices. We are not obligated to go back and say things to someone or work something out with someone that will not be heard, that will not be responded to, because that will in turn, Rabbi Akiva teaches, lead back to the first prohibition, which is don't hate your brother in your heart. So if I go back to the person who is not going to be working things out with me, who is just going to be further abusive to me, I am going to end up resenting him even more in my heart. So rather than do that, it's a matter of going back to the place where it happened, not necessarily geographically. It's more like you said, it's more about instead of forgetting about it and blocking it out, to sit at the Seder, for example, at some point when you eat the bitter herbs and really feel that terrible, horrifying feeling that you came away with when you were in that situation, and to take the bitterness in and to really face it and to really ingest it and restore it to yourself, to take that part that got stuck in that gook and that glue over there and bring it back to yourself, and then take up the cup of wine and say, Vehi sha'amda la'otenu v'lanu, and she is the one who stood up for us, b'chol dor v'dor, in every generation, and redeemed us from our land. And so all these prayers in celebration of redemption now take on a more personal meaning. It's not just about how God rescued my ancestors, but it's also how God gave me the fortitude, the power to leave my Egypt, my own Egypt. And so you move from the bitterness into the celebration, which is how the Seder goes. It goes into the bitterness, into the saltiness, into the plagues, into the suffering that we endured in Egypt, and then it moves out into the redemption. It moves out into the freedom, and then we lean like queens and kings on the pillows or on somebody else's shoulder, and we eat delicious matzo ball soup. The great meal then comes to us. And it's so important, if you do it that way, then it might just take 1 or 2 Passovers, or maybe just one. Because the whole meal is designed to gradually move you through the bitterness, through the trauma, into the place of the celebration of God's presence in your life, of God's giving you the strength and the power to do what you did. Because God is always working with us. I know some of you might think that's bullshit, that's bull. But the fact is that, like I said this morning to some people who were in the class this morning, I have gotten utility bills from the propane man, from the electric man, and from the telephone lady, but I ain't never gotten a bill from God saying, on last Tuesday you almost had that car accident in that hill. I saved your ass, and you owe me. That's $300 right there. On Wednesday night, there was a little plaque in one of your veins, and I took care of it while you were sleeping. That'll be $600. You were climbing that mountain the other day, and you slipped on some loose rocks, and you almost fell off the cliff, but you caught your balance. Or if I might say so, I caught your balance. That'll be at least $1,000. That could have been the end of you. I never got a bill from God. I've been in this life 55 years. I've been through a lot of stuff. I've been in the army and wars and everything in the world, and I never got a bill. Yes.
I guess he's got a bad post office. Anyway, we're going in to this time of coming out of restriction and maybe deprivation or whatever, and right now in current history, well, in those times, you know, around Moshe and whatnot, people were married to several people at one time.
Uh-huh.
A person could be married. Now we're seeing Orthodox Jewish people agreeing with this in the present day, this amendment to have marriage defined as one man, one woman. Can you speak to the difference in those two world views?
Yeah. Well, first I need to say it really pisses me off that we're agreeing to anything like that. That's so that just doesn't exist in our path. You know, I think that so much of our people has been influenced so deeply, living for so many thousand, you know, close to 2,000 years under the influence of cultures not our own, that we've adapted and adopted a lot of stuff from those cultures that just don't fit with who we are as a people in our original ways. You know, we have no law in our tradition that says you can't marry more than or be with more than one partner. It became, as long as each partner gives permission to the next partner. You know, man just couldn't marry many wives. He had to have permission for one wife to marry another wife, another written authorization. It was written in stone back then, you know. And a woman can have several partners if she wasn't married, because marriage was a man thing, because you needed to have everything intact. Okay, she belongs to me, and the kids belong to me. I want to know who the kids are. So it's more of a male thing. But if a woman decided she just wanted to live with whoever, whenever, without the institution of marriage, that is and was a legitimate way in our tradition. In the 1000s, it was polygamy, or I don't know how to say it, I guess polygamy, was banned by Rabbi Gershon Winkler. He was the head supreme rabbinic authority at that time in Europe. And many of the sources at the time say he created the ban for the Jewish people not to have more than one partner because of the influence because we were being persecuted just for being Jews. And so he felt that we make things worse by not living according to the sexual morality laws of the Christian culture in Europe under which we lived. So maybe 2 or 3 less Jews were burned alive because of that. So, but in other countries that were not under the Christian rule of the church, big discrepancy between Christian and church and the church of that time, you'll find that the Jews continued to have larger, more extended families. So I cannot understand the logic, the theologic behind these people who claim to represent Judaism, backing something which is totally not in cadence with our people's way or with the Torah way. The Torah does not legislate about about that kind of stuff. It left it really very open. Our ancestors had extended families. It was adoption. There was the option of pilegesh, which meant a relationship between a man and a woman who were not married. And pilegesh means plak ishut, half marriage, a committed relationship between 2 people not married. She didn't need a divorce from the guy, didn't need a lawyer, didn't need a marriage ceremony. We had all these options, and we had to seize it because we're living under the thumb of other people who were dictating something very different to us. I feel that even the most traditional of us have been churchized, Christianized in the sense that we've adopted too much of what was not our values and not our sense about sensuality and sexuality. And that's a tragedy. That's very, very sad to me. So no, they should never have backed it, but they did, and because they're so much they're trying to combat gay and lesbian marriages, and I guess they feel that this is a way to do that because there are no other options. You can't, what's trying to be amended does not state any other options, but to go through the definition of only one man with one woman equals a marriage. And so we can claim that we have separation of church of state in this country, but the fact is we don't. Yes?
You said something before about Israel being in people's hearts, and that once you get there, it's all over.
Mm-hmm.
I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah.
And then you also talked about the importance of being able to go back and see people anew. And I feel so discouraged
Mm-hmm.
and almost anti-Zionist.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if you have any words of inspiration.
My words of inspiration is that, I feel anti-Zionist and I feel anti-Palestinianist. That any ism, both isms are really bad. And my words for encouragement, however, is like this. There are many Jews in Israel, and there are many Arabs in Israel and Palestinians who are working together. You don't read about them. All you read about is the bombings that happen and the tragedies of Jews being killed or Palestinians being killed. And you don't read about the peace marches of Israelis and Palestinians marching together in the Galilee, and you don't read about Israelis and Palestinians sitting together having tea and coffee and laughing. And you don't read about Arabs and Jews doing music together in Amirim, in Moshav Amirim. Were you there when you went to Israel? Did you go to Moshav Amirim at all? Amirim up north in the Galilee. It's a wonderful place to go. You were there? Yeah. It's great. You go to Amirim, you see Arabs and Jews playing music together and having a wonderful time. You don't read about that kind of stuff because it just, doesn't make headlines and it's not sensational. I feel hopeful because there are bad people on both sides who don't want to heal and they don't want to end conflict. Everybody wants to have everything go their way, and no matter what the cost. And then you have good people on both sides who do. And I have my faith in the good people because historically one sees that it doesn't happen by governmental polity. It happens by grassroots people, by the mothers of the Palestinians and the mothers of the Israelites, by the fathers of the Arabs, the fathers of the Jews, walking hand in hand, doing things together. There's even a village of Palestinians and Jews living together. What's it called again? Neve Shalom? Hat Salam, yeah. Between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, there's this nice village to visit where Palestinian children are growing up with Israeli children, this little community, and where Jewish children are learning Arabic. They write Arabic, they speak Arabic, Arabic children learning Hebrew. Things like that are happening behind the scenes. I have a friend named Devorah Brous who runs an organization called Bustan, which is Arabic and Hebrew for orchard. And so, and she gathers funds and volunteers, both Jews and Arabs, to go into unrecognized Bedouin villages where they build clinics and stuff like that, which the Israeli government doesn't want to do. So grassroots people are doing it. Like civil rights in this country did not happen because of a Senate vote. It happened because of a nice little lady called Rosa Parks who got up and said, "I ain't sitting in the back of the bus no more." That's it. It takes grassroots people to make things happen, and the media is very discouraging because the media is not reporting about my friend Eliyahu McLean walking with Sheikh Ali Saleh Muhammad Hussein, marching up and down through the villages and the cities, hand in hand.
Why do you think it's not reported?
Because it just doesn't fit the mold of the flow of the conflict. We have a Middle East conflict, and therefore it's news. I mean, look, watch TV and observe how the news shifts, from one conflict to another conflict, one murder scenario to another murder scenario that's even better. The whole world's falling apart, and now they're focusing on Michael Jackson. Then that story would get old because something else will happen. Some Sputnik will fall from the sky and blow up in Central Park. So, whenever there's something newsworthy, sensationalism-wise, it'll be reported. The news is very biased. You'll see whenever something happens against a Palestinian refugee village, there's news media galore showing the people wounded and people crying and screaming over the dead. And when somebody gets blown up in Israel, all they show you is a burnt-out bus and an ambulance pulling away. There's not a lot of coverage, a lot of detail. Repeatedly, they show the same blown-out bus and the ambulance going away and somebody with whiplash being hauled away on a stretcher. They don't show the bodies and the limbs and the things like that, but they do show that whenever there is something happening against the Palestinians. And so it all depends on the agenda of people in the media, people who run the media, people who want to bring across a certain political agenda.
And the people who read this stuff, who want to hear that, that's what they want to hear.
The Jews are bad, we're always doing things wrong, and everybody else is right, and the underdog is the one who gets the biggest publicity. They're living in refugee camps, they have no money, they have no food, they have no drink, no water. Meanwhile, Arafat, their leader, has billions of dollars stashed away in his bank account, and that's fine, but nobody cares about that, nobody talks about that. Nobody talks about how the Palestinians have had jobs and economic security before the Intifada, when they were able to travel in and out of Israel all the time and have jobs which they couldn't have in Arafat's land, while he sits with all the money. Nobody talks about that. It's all about visuals and everything else. Both sides are totally not doing it right on the political policy level. Each side refuses to bless the other. Until the enemy blesses the enemy, there's only enemies. No accords, no shaking hands will do anything, no peace accords will work. The blessing of the enemy, blessing the enemy, is happening on a grassroots level. Every time I go to Israel, I witness it. I sit there with them. You've been to Israel, and you witnessed a little bit of it. There's the tragedy and the sadness, and there's the celebration of how things, nevertheless, are going very well on a grassroots level between individuals and groups who try to get the two sides together in unison, who remember that we're a family of humanity. Otherwise, it's discouraging.
So you're saying those grassroots folks have gone back to revisit the trauma?
I think that they have, otherwise they couldn't do this. I remember when I first, I go to Israel every year, sometimes twice. I'll be there in June teaching. And I have Lebanese, I have Egyptians, I have Palestinians who sneak out of the West Bank that join us at our gatherings in the Judean desert. We go in the desert. It's far away from all the politics. We all sit together, we sing together, they sing their songs, we sing our songs. We make fun of each other, we laugh, we cry, we lament the conflict, and we pray together for the hope of it. The first time I went to do this kind of work, it was in 1999, and I went and I was introduced to Sheikh Ali Saleh Muhammad Hussein, who was the sheikh of a little West Bank village called Deir Katis. A very devout Muslim sheikh, and he grew up being taught that Jews are bad and they're out to kill him, and he's always afraid of Israelis. That's how he grew up, on that side of the fence. And I grew up, being afraid of the Arabs. They're out to drive us into the sea. And when we both met each other for the first time, we met each other in the desert. He came to an event where I was talking, and we became very close. We spent the entire night talking and dialoguing together and sharing each our prejudices that we grew up with about the other.
sharing each our fear of the other. And that's about going back to that place, being open about it, and really revisiting those prejudices with which people are raised. And at the end of the night, we blessed each other, and I did the morning prayer in the Jewish way, and he did it the Islamic way, on a blanket on his knees, and it was great. And we've been very close to this very day. The second time I came to Israel, a year later, I looked around for my Israeli people to pick me up at the airport, and I saw them way over there. But then I saw big signs saying, Baruch haba Gershon, blessed is the one who comes, old Gershon, whatever. And I thought, oh, that must be the Israeli contingent. What are they doing over there? Who's holding the sign up? I look over there, and there's Sheikh Ali Saleh Ahmad Hussein, standing there with his son Yaqub, holding up a big sign in Hebrew, welcoming me. And so they had a big fight over who drives me to the desert. The Sheikh wanted me to be driven with his car, and the Israeli wanted to drive their car, so we just had a caravan. And I drove with the Sheikh, and it was fun. He stayed with us for the weekend again. Then the Intifada broke out, and he couldn't leave the West Bank anymore, and we had to sneak in and out of each other. He would sneak out, and I would sneak in. And then it got too difficult. We haven't seen each other in a while, but we will in June, because now he has been given permission to travel anywhere he wants to in Israel by the Israeli government. It is about going back. In Colorado many years ago, I was working on a ranch after I left New York City and everything. And before I lived in West Virginia, I lived in Colorado for a while in the mountains. And I was looking for a cabin to rent. I didn't want to live in a bunkhouse. And I went to the bar, a saloon, that's where everybody lived, and had me a borscht with some prune juice chaser, and asked the woman with the tattoo on her chest, not that I was looking, but I was told later that she had a tattoo there. I asked her if she knew anybody who was renting a cabin. Meanwhile, there was a big burly guy on my left side, big giant man with a big pearl-handled revolver, which was illegal to carry around in public, and a big cowboy hat. And he was telling Jew jokes to the guy next to him. They're really bad jokes, too. And she said, yeah, my husband Ron has a cabin to rent. It's only $100 a month. It's got no water, no electricity. It's way out in the woods. I said, perfect, that's what I'm looking for. Is he here today? He said, yeah, he's sitting next to you. Oh, this nice fella right here? No, the big guy next to you. Oh, this Hittite here, this Nazi, he's the one. So at that moment, I was thinking to myself, forget it, I'll just look in the paper. It comes out every 3 years, local paper, handwritten. Another part of me felt, it's tiring to keep running away from anti-Semitism. It's there. There are people that hate Jews. There are people who hate other people too. So I turned to him and I said, I hear you have a cabin for rent. And so he took me there the next day and showed me the cabin. I rented it from him. I bargained with him because $100 did not feel fair to me, so I bargained up to $150. It was such a great place. How can you just take $100 a month? It was ludicrous. I said $125. He said no, $100. Okay, $150, and that's up. One day I come into the saloon to give the rent, and he's sitting there and he won't talk to me. And I asked him what's wrong, and he says, I found out that you're Jewish. I said, that's right, Mazel Tov. I did the horror. So I said, what's the problem with that? He said, well, I don't like Jews, and you never told me you were Jewish. I said, well, you never asked. I don't like anti-Semites either, So why don't you like Jews? Christ killers, all in the media, run the banks. I said, that's great, you read all these nice things about us. I read a lot of things about you too, but it didn't stop me from looking at you through all that stuff that I read to see you as a person, as a human being. And you're the nicest landlord I've ever had. Why can't you look at me through everything you've read? Why do you just believe in what you read instead of reading a person?
Anyway, if we do own the media, you should be grateful to us. Otherwise, you'd still be watching black and white newsreels of World War I. We've given you Daffy Duck, Mickey Mouse. We've given you all these shows, Blue's Clues. To make a long story short, we ended up talking and drinking all into the evening till they shut down the saloon. And he drove me home to his house because I was totally drunk. Shit-faced, yes. Can we say that on public TV? Yeah? Can we? Is that allowed? All right, we were shit-faced. Very badly. I've never been so drunk in my life. But we became very close, good friends, and took me back home, and I slept on his sofa. And there was a big swastika flag in his living room. And when I woke up in the morning, it was gone. So it's up to, you can go back to the place. You can. It's hard sometimes, it's scary sometimes. But until we do, there's, the peacemaking requires us to go back and make peace. If we can't make peace with the person or the people, we need to go and make peace in that place where the conflict resides in us. And Passover is an excellent opportunity to do that, because Passover comes at the time of the full moon, lots of light in the dark, and time of spring, when things that seem to never have any chance of ever coming out of the earth again, ever coming out of constriction again, now emerges with color, with aroma, with brand new life, and so can each of us. Wish you all a really good night. Sleep well. Go home. And stay away from each other. It's not healthy.